let's get started with the topic. So now you're wondering, wait a second, did I sign up for the right event? I thought this whole topic was about project portfolio management. Why am I seeing a big compass that says strategy on it? Now, spoiler alert, the answer is actually right at the bottom. So PMI, which most of us are familiar with, which is a project management institute, in their portfolio management guide, they say that a portfolio is a collection of projects, programs, and operations managed as a collective, right? And so it's managed as a collective because the intent is to manage strategic objectives. So if I can just get to the next slide, please. So what does that mean? So if we say that a portfolio is designed to achieve strategic objectives, the point is that it gives us a sense of just how important this practice is. I mean, an organization strategy is basically what decides how it gets from A to B. And a portfolio is designed to achieve those objectives. So I'm not going to say anything more besides the fact about just how important this topic is. So what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here? So the first is, what are the implications of poor portfolio management? So what does that mean? Like, if portfolio management isn't done well, what are the problems that we would typically run into? Is it people issues? Is it confusion in our organizations? So keep that in the back of your mind. The whole point of these questions is not that we're going to answer it now. That's where our esteemed panelists will come in. This is just to get your brain primed to how to think about this event. The second question is, what are the challenges with portfolio management? There are lots of aspects about portfolio management, whether it's selecting the right projects or how we monitor these projects, how we report on these projects. Again, no answers just yet, no spoilers, but just keep these questions at the back of your mind. And then the last question is, how do we sustain these benefits? So a project might take us from A to B, but it's so much more than that. Once we actually deliver a project or even projects within a portfolio, how do we make sure that our organizations actually see the continued value of this portfolio? And next slide, please. So now we've heard you, we actually conducted a bunch of surveys. I'm sure the sample size was really, really large. I don't think the results would differ too much. So our audience, what we're seeing is about a third of you, close to a third, are at the beginner stage when it comes to portfolio management. But over 60% of you say that you're the beginner and intermediate, with roughly about a third at the advanced stage. The point of this being is, it doesn't matter what your level of experience here is. We all have something to learn. There's a reason we redesigned the logo. There's a reason we have to lead. The idea is to show that knowledge is something that can always be expanded upon. And that is the point of this community. We bring our panelists so that all of us, regardless of your experience, have something more to learn. And I think we have just one more slide to go. And so how is this event going to benefit you? So first of all, we've taken a lot of great care. We had fantastic panelists, but the reason we have Giuliano, Shannon, Sandra, and Robin, actually looking at all of them here, is because they've come from a breadth of experience in different industries, which I think is going to be absolutely beneficial to everyone here at this online event. The second thing is, our panelists, we've actually asked them just to cover the different aspects of portfolio management. So our hope is that through this event, you're going to get almost, I don't want to say 360, I think that's setting the expectations too high since we are at a certain time limit for this event, but you are going to get a general sense of what's involved in portfolio management. And for those of you who are new to the practice, don't feel like this is out of the realm of your experience. It absolutely is not. Portfolio management, having some understanding of it, allows you to understand the bigger picture. What that means is, I guarantee, because this happened to me personally, if you go back to your companies the next day, you have a much, much wider appreciation of not just the organization strategy, but about how projects are selected and what your role in these projects are. And so with that, Joe, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, John. I think you've prepped us all up and we're all excited to hear Shannon as she starts off. Go ahead, Shannon.
Great, thank you, Joe. As you mentioned, just before I dive into the framework up here, I've had 15 years of experience in project portfolio management in various industries, as well as public sector, private sector, not-for-profit. And I used to teach project management at Humber College as well. So I have some justification for sitting here today. And I really look forward to meeting some of you again in person after. What I wanted to start with was a very simplified, oversimplified view of a version of PPM process. So everybody across this panel today will probably have their own version And there's no right or wrong. What I want to share with you today is how I think you can think about PPM, especially that beginner group of folks, or even if you're trying to explain to your family, your friends, your colleagues, or your stakeholders at work in simple terms, what is PPM, so that they remember it. So I'm going to take you through an example. I have two. One is grocery shopping for your family. So you started with what are your objectives? You want them to eat healthy. Your kids probably want some sweets. There's a whole, you've got your strategy there. What are the goals, the objectives? And then you take some ideas onto your shopping list. So I could go on with that one. You get the idea. I'm going to go to the more fun example, which is planning a trip, and I want your help. So if you're thinking about planning a trip for your family or your friends, I invite you, my friends, to help me plan a trip today. Really quickly, because I think I only have 4 minutes. So we'll define the strategic objectives. So one of the objectives might be to relaxation. That's my top objective. Another objective I'm going to say is learning, cultural expansion, learning about the history of a particular destination. And the third one might be something more physically active, challenging, something sports related. And so the strategy here, and I'm clearly oversimplifying, but you start out with what is it you're trying to achieve? What are your goals? And then you can take your ideas. And what I'd like to pause here is to say, this whole time you're including all your stakeholders. So you, my friends, I want you involved from the beginning. We agreed on the strategic objectives, and now we're going to intake some ideas. So if I can, from the audience, have some destinations, please. New York, Rome, Hawaii. New York, Rome, and Hawaii, is that where we're going? All right, okay. So those are some of our ideas. And now what we need to do is prioritize. And so what we want to do, and you wouldn't probably do this with your friends, but I'm giving you a framework by which you could come up with a prioritized list or a ranked list without making anybody feel like they were singled out or they were excluded. And so by bringing my friends along in the stakeholder process here, I invite us to say what's most important to us. And so we've agreed that most important is beach vacation. Just nod your head. Yes, we agreed. Relaxation, beach vacation. And so we're going to apply some ratings there. And so I'm not going to go through the full example, but just to give you a quick example. If our top priority, our top goal is relaxation, I'm going to give relaxation, alignment to strategy, anything that aligns to our relaxation, a 10. Anything that aligns to, say, the second objective, which was cultural expansion, a 5, and then a 0 to the bottom one, which was the adventure one. And so what we're doing here is we're creating a framework by which you can take those ideas and then almost mathematically slot them into a ranked order. And so in addition to alignment to strategy, another criteria might be risk. We all have families, we don't want high risk. We have limited resources. So where do we fall in the budget? So something that is within budget, a 10, we're going to give it a 10. Something that's below budget, maybe a 5, and something that's over budget is 0. And so what we're trying to do then is take all of our ideas order according to our criteria. And so we of course have to allocate those resources. We want to manage risk as we go. We want to monitor and adapt. So now that we've selected our destination, you want to monitor and adapt. What if your plane gets canceled? You have to adjust. You want to adapt if you're getting some feedback over there. You want to adapt. And we want to report out at the end. So if I have a friend whose husband makes her report out on their variance after every trip. How much did they spend? And then their underspend can go towards next year's trip. And if they overspend, then they don't get a trip next year. So I just wanted to give that very simple example for people to think about PPM process oversimplified. And the importance of bringing your stakeholders along with you the entire time so that nobody feels like they've been left behind or like you've made the decision on their behalf. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm probably over time, so I'm going to go through these super quickly. There are many critical success factors for PPM. These are mine. These are the ones that I'd like to share with you. I've already shared the first one, bringing your stakeholders along with you. Elicit visible and active leadership support. Establish effective governance. And I'm going to say right-size your governance. Not every organization needs the same level of governance. Be as specific as possible with your strategic objectives, because otherwise everybody's projects will align to some element of the strategy, and then that doesn't help you when it comes to prioritizing. Proper alignment and sequencing with other corporate planning processes. And I can touch on this a little bit later, perhaps. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but that's really important from a timing sequence perspective. And then the big rocks I have encountered, and I'm happy to speak with some of you afterwards about these, or to answer your questions later in the chat. Big rocks I've encountered: organizations that don't believe in business cases or don't do them well. Executive compliance. I found a lot of executives buy into the process initially until it doesn't suit their needs. And benefits realization. In my experience, and I'm very interested to hear from the other panelists. In my experience, benefits realization has been a difficult one to get executives on board with. I find that there's desire for it, but then they don't really want to do it. And so with that, I will hand it back over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Actually, I think Giuliano is ready, so please take it away.
Perfect. So first off, great presentation. I feel like I need to go on a trip now. So very quick introduction to me outside of what was already graciously presented. Name's Giuliano. Also have about 15 years experience in the world of project and portfolio management. I am currently on my day job, Senior Director of Delivery Operations, and you can think a combination of project management office and product deliveries is my wheelhouse right now. And I'm looking forward to interacting with all of you after this session. All right, so for looking at my career, I had the opportunity and the privilege of creating a couple of PPM frameworks. And given my background in tech over the last decade or so, what I found interesting was that industry was heavily dominated by product. So with that comes its own set of challenges, such as the PMO, the PPM process is pretty foreign to these folks in this industry. So what I really want to focus on in my slides is really look at how to start up a PPM from scratch, some of the obstacles that came my way and what I've done to overcome them. And the first thing I want to start is really focus on the planning element. So by planning, I mean really overcome specific hurdles that come our way. And there's three here I identified, and I think this is broad enough to cover any industry, any company, any region. But to go through these quickly, so first is business alignment. So what I really mean by that is you as the person spearheading the PPM, how much knowledge do you have of the organization you work for? Some things to think about is what are the objectives of the company? How does the company make money? What's their business model? Who are their clients? Who are their customers? So really having that understanding up front is going to give you the foundation for PPM. Moving to that second section, performance measurement is what I call, and it's kind of an extension of that. So once you really understand the company you work for, you want to be able to measure success, or even failure or progress. It's probably the better way of looking at it. So how does the company value success, or how do they value progress? And lucky for us in PPM, project managers, and all of that, we have in our core DNA the ability to report on performance, to report in general, distribute that information. So very important to get the performance measurement aspect right. And the third hurdle I found, at least in my career, is having some element of project management skill set in your organization already, or even the methodology in place. So it's very hard going from not having any PPM experience at all in your organization to crafting a PPM. So it's a gradual process. All three of these hurdles are a gradual process. It's really a collaborative and time-intensive process to overcome each of these hurdles. And this slide here, you can consider it just another way of looking at that first slide. And what I do is, with focusing on the planning, is really asking myself, first identify the right questions, very important. So identify the right questions and then provide answers to those questions. And I really want to emphasize here that it's not strictly the person crafting the PPM framework. It's not me, for example, it's a collection of many stakeholders involved. So some of the questions I ask, similar to that first slide, the hurdles I've overcome, is what are the company's short, medium, and long-term objectives? Very important to know. That's going to be the basis of how you structure your portfolios when the time comes. How is the business structured today? Maybe the way their org chart is structured can give you an idea of how to structure your PPM strategy as well. So this list here obviously is not an exhaustive list. And but the beauty of this is you can cater it to your organization. So the key is to identify the right questions and then provide answers to them. Next slide, please. So this is, I apologize for the messy slide. I tried to get everything into one slide, but this is something I actually used. I just changed the data a little bit. I use this for presenting to my leadership. And with PPM or PMOs in general, it's all about proving consistent value to the organization. That's the most important thing. So the way to look at this slide is value is presented to the audience, whoever the audience is, management, leadership, the company, from the top down. So best way to look at this, right at the top, you have the PPM services that you offer. That's very visible to your company, to your employees, to clients, etc. Such as being transparent, unbiased, all of that stuff, being able to prioritize effectively based off of the needs of the organization. So long story short, that top layer is the kind of layer that's the most visible to the organization. Below that, you have the metrics, the KPIs. So looking at KPIs from a PPM perspective, which should be pretty adjacent to what the company is trying to achieve, success of the company. And then below that, in this example here, there's two portfolios based off of the needs of the company that I rehashed the data on. But on the left, you have what I call client-based portfolio. So it's how the company makes the money or their core method of generating revenue. In our case, it was projects that we've done with clients, with customers, etc. So everything is contained within that portfolio. And on the right side, portfolio number 2 is more of a future-based portfolio. So our company at the time was trying to introduce a brand new product that was hopefully, and it actually worked out in our favor, so that's great to hear, is expand the business model to accept new regions, new clients and things like that. So each one of these elements have their own KPI structure, their own programs, their own projects, and they should be treated as such. I almost look at them as little areas of businesses that roll up to the wider business. Finally, yeah, perfect. No, you can go to the next slide. So this slide here looks at how do you get buy-in. So once you have a plan in place and you're looking to scale this across the organization, there's 2 elements here to look at quickly. So the first, I think most people get very anxious of getting leadership buy-in and focus on that. What I found is really helpful is start with what's in your control. There's nothing stopping you from implementing PPM at a very small scale in your organization. Prove it works. You have a collection of projects if you're building maturity. And then you want to get a fact-based case studies from that. Collect data, get the facts right, see how value is being provided. And then, only then is when you would approach leadership, approach management, and get buy-in. And then I think the second aspect that's very important, this is my final point, is it's not enough to just get leadership buy-in. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. How often did we get approval for something for leadership? We tried to get wide-scale adoption from our peers, and then it kind of dies. As engagement dies, we lose our focus. So this is where education becomes very important, being able to become the subject matter experts of whatever you're starting. In this case, PPM, really becoming expert of it, and then continuously improving hit rate and teach that to the audience, which is the company at large.
Thank you. Thanks, Giuliano. We're going to move on to Sandra. You have the mic.
Sandra Boyle, introduction. I've been involved in project management for over 20 years. I've started numerous PMOs and portfolios. I'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So I love projects and I love portfolios. I think portfolios progress. I think the pandemic actually showed a lot of organizations that weren't so or portfolio focused, that if they wanted to pivot, project management is the way to do it. And then focusing your efforts in a portfolio-based approach help them to thrive. And so I think we saw a lot of organizations start to grow. So really an interesting topic, and thank you so much for including me on the panel today and to join this esteemed group here. It's such a privilege. So thank you. A couple of slides here. Really talking about portfolio management and the elements involved. And you guys hit on, I'm sitting there the whole time listening so far going, yeah, that's right, it's excellent. So I'll try to go through some things maybe more quickly if it's already been said, and I'll go through. So if we go to the first bullet there, we've talked about strategic alignment. I think sometimes people forget the purpose of your portfolio. That may sound really silly, but you just hit on it a second ago, was what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And no two portfolios are the same. Organizations have a purpose. And what is that portfolio? And measure it. I've been in PMOs where sometimes what they measure is what they think is important to the projects. And so they'll have all these metrics to measure project management and a dashboard. Not to say that that's bad, because that can be really helpful. But was your portfolio created for a specific purpose? And are you measuring that specific purpose? So first, align to the strategy, and then measure to show the results that you did what you were intending to do. For example, I might have a need to get to market faster with our projects. I'll measure that from the inception to that charter being signed. I would measure and see how long does it take, and have we improved upon that metric? Because I've had executives before that really are just, they hate how long it takes to start a project. They just want it started. Start to measure and get clear sign off with your stakeholders that what is the goal of the portfolio that they want, or the goals, there may be several, and then measure those specific goals. The rest is also great information that you might want to have on the side for future opportunity, but be really specific about aligning to that strategy and then helping with the decisions that go along with that. Balanced portfolio and risk management. Once you start prioritizing your projects, you might have this aha moment, like we can't do it all. And you can't usually. I'm not a next. So the balanced portfolio, take a look at, let's say if I prioritized all my projects. So I would have 100 projects, and we have a framework, and we've prioritized it. And we say, great, we're going to do the top 5. I had a client and had to help them see that those 5 extremely important, great financial benefits, the right thing to do, they happen to be the highest hits, all 5 of them. And you want to do all 5 of them this year. You want to have a portfolio that has a mix of low-hanging fruit and great value projects. You want a mix of low complexity, high complexity. You want a portfolio that at the end of the year, you have some successes, because your high-risk ones are going to experience issues. That's why they're high risk, whether it's delays, maybe the benefits weren't what you were expecting. So you want to have a mix of the portfolio. Don't just say, we have enough resources and money to do the top 10. They happen to be the most riskiest one. We're going to do the top 10. Take a look at your portfolio and balance it. So you also do mitigate your risk. Resource allocation is probably part of that analysis as well. Do we have the capacity to handle the projects? Do we have the skills? Can we allocate? Can we deliver what we set out on? And then the next one is to look at agility, visibility, and control. So when you manage your projects as a portfolio, now you are taking a look at how we're doing on the projects. You might decide, I'm going to slow this one down and speed this one up, or I'm going to put this one on hold for now and come back to it. I can see interdependencies. I can do all of these great things in managing when I look at it as a portfolio, as opposed to an organization of 100 projects all competing with everything. As a portfolio, we can now be aligned and we can be strategic as well. And last but not least, enhanced governance. So building out that structure, having a common framework that is used for your projects will just actually make you more agile in the future because people learn how to do projects and what's expected. So those areas really cover the main elements on a high level. You know, I've only got like 5 minutes, so I could go on forever, but I won't go on forever on this. Happy to talk later or something. I'm going to talk about balancing portfolios a little bit more because it is an important aspect that I've seen take place. And I look at these 8 items as 8 considerations when you're looking at balancing your portfolios. Now you may choose, I'm going to look at 2 or 3 typically to say that matters the most, but these are some examples of things that you may be considering. So maximizing value. In your organization, it might be, we are an organization that puts products out there. We want to increase our top line revenue. So you might be more focused on maximizing the value of your portfolio and looking at your portfolio in terms of that. Or I did talk about strategic alignment and prioritization, taking a look at what's our 5-year plan and how do our projects align to that 5-year plan. And then prioritizing accordingly and building that out over those 5 years. A risk profile, important to look at what's the likelihood of your projects actually being completed and managing the risk and being able to handle the amount of risk that your portfolio is undertaking. Interdependencies, this was like a big one in Canada, but you'll have these projects that might rely on other projects. And so you want to take a look at how do they work together? How do they get timed? In your portfolio, you may want a project to come a little bit later after you've stabilized the initial project that is built upon. So you take a look at how those interdependencies work and how do you communicate interdependencies between all project managers managing those different projects. Funding. Funding, where's your funding sources? How will we fund all of the projects? What's our funding objectives? Do we take into consideration the savings? Do we take into consideration ROI over time? We start to look at just how that gets handled. It's different in every organization. In government, they may have mandates that come with funding, and so they'll allocate it accordingly. They may use taxation, so they may have the rates, they may have the levy, they may do those types of things to fund their projects and have rules around what the funding can be used for. In private sector, it can be a little bit different. They may just have a certain amount that is there for use. Maybe they'll have money in reserve. Same with public sector as well. They may have reserves as well they draw on. So taking a look at the funding and determining how much gets funded each year and how you'll prioritize that funding. Complexity, kind of like risk. How complex are your projects and taking a look at your ability to actually deliver. Resourcing your projects. It can be internal resourcing. It can also be external resourcing. Looking at how will we resource. I know especially I've seen this along with my public sector clients, they'll look at resourcing in some positions, they'll want them to be internal so that knowledge doesn't leave the organization when the project's done. So it's keeping those kinds of things in mind and looking at how you'll use those resources, external or internal. And change management, all of this, all projects, portfolios represent change in your organization. I remember having a conversation, a peer leader, about the project portfolio and about change management and how much change were we introducing to the organization. And so it really sparked interesting conversation between the different groups to understand if I'm training them on this, and training them on this, and training them on this, and this, and this, and this, and this, will that impact customer service? So we started to look at what can we handle, what's the right order of it, and how will we help them embrace the change and adopt the change, right? So a really hot topic I find in the past few years for organizations and something to think about in their portfolios as well. I feel like I'm racing. I'm sorry if I'm racing. Am I going too fast? Take a breath.
I need to get some water. So.
Okay, there you go. So I'm going to slow down on this one a little bit. So here's some examples. That's fun. There you go. Now I'm watching the other. So Air Canada was an interesting place that I worked at for a number of years. Great ecosystem of different types of projects. And really like working with 40 different companies because there's so many different departments and they each have their own corporate culture. So I work with, Air Canada Vacations, and they had a very specific culture, really easygoing, happy, helping people go on these great vacations. And then I'd switch over and work with the pilots in the operations group, and they're very, very professional, very deliberate, and very command and control. And it permeates in everything they do. And so they would, when I would assign project managers to them, I looked for PMs that were servant leaders. You can't go in and tell pilots what to do. They're so used to being in control, they're not comfortable if they're not, and it just comes out everywhere. But being a servant PM is excellent anyways, but having a PM that understands, I'm gonna go in and help you deliver your projects, give you what you need and prop you up and make sure you've got what you need to get this project successfully delivered. You look at those cultural things. So there's some interesting things in Air Canada that way. They aligned their projects to what they call 4 engines. I try to remember it's financial, customer experience, commercial, and operational, and their projects had to align to that. It was a little bit generic. People had a lot of fun trying to slip in their projects to one of these engines. You're talking about Shannon. But really specific portfolios across the organization, and they had to have the funding in their budget, and they had to go to a central CFO group that would review their funding requests, and then the organization would go from there. We would sometimes have organization-wide portfolio campaigns for cost savings or revenue generation. Their big focus, financial benefits, staffing the projects from our PMO, and then just governance, enhanced governance on the projects. Air Canada Cargo, I went in and built their portfolio and their PMO. When I went in, they had 99 projects. But it was too many for them. And so we rationalized it. I think we got them down to about, let's say, low 20s in the project. That really made a lot of sense for their size, their capacity. And then they started to see way more success because they were able to focus, apply the right resourcing. We got that portfolio to a great sweet spot where they were having lots of successes on the project, which was fantastic. And it was really building up the governance and teaching them about projects and building that project management expertise in the organization. Orange Air Ambulance, they had themed portfolios and were focused on, again, financial benefits and governance. Interesting there, they would have, they were very aligned to their 5-year strategic plan. So really great how they would choose their projects accordingly. So there's a 5-year plan. These are the projects that rose to the top, and they would take a look at those projects overall and work that through. And then they would hit the button one more time. Oh, go back. There you go. Pure. So Purelator, they wanted strategic objectives. We took a look at building out their portfolio. Interesting group dynamic there because all of the groups have all of these projects. So we went through a very large, prioritization exercise, prioritizing, but also creating a balanced portfolio and looking at, let's balance low-hanging fruits that gets great successes. And then let's also look at the great value in some of the more riskier and complex projects as well, so that they can have a great balance on the portfolio. And their biggest challenge, they had so many different projects, was resource leveling. How do we resource allocate and manage all those resources? And we looked at a lot of things like the timing of certain projects so that we could level that out, and external hires as well to help with those projects. And then also building out on the governance with that group. It's interesting to see, like, with all the portfolios, they all had different, somewhat similar, but somewhat different objectives, right? And figuring out, what do they need? How do we do it? How do we build that out in the organization? So it was really all of them different and all of them really interesting to see what's required. So that was my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Wow. So very informative. Thank you so far. And now we're just going to carry on with Robin.
Thank you. Wow, that was a lot of science and some of the art of it. And I think you guys have covered every possible element. So I was furiously taking notes, going off script here now. That was great. I'm looking at, Shannon focused on engagement, and then there was the planning, and then, measuring and maturity, and then Sandra on purpose. They're all different, and looking at mixing of the portfolio effectively, if you can, just to sort of, I guess, proof it, so to speak. And then I look at what I've been working on, and I've been working mostly in the healthcare sector and so-called security sector. I've got over 40 years project management experience, growing up on a small farm, running graduate, research projects there, and over 20 years in working with portfolios in different respects. And wow, I'm throwing my whole script out. This is good though. This is fun. I do have a slide. This slide I chose because I thought it's a bad slide. You need to see it. So you'll see, you can't see it, but in the middle is a number 7, and it says, assessing maturity, something like that. And the truth is, you need to do maturity assessment or readiness assessment at the very beginning and all the way through, because that's where the wheels fall off. That's where you lose engagement. And so for me, I started early on looking at readiness assessment for all of my projects. And I developed something that I called code whispering, which is sort of getting to know the DNA of the stakeholders involved. And the better you know them, the better you can serve them. And it's key for me. And to look at this was I think a Vancouver project some years ago. And I'm amazed that they put maturity assessment in the middle of it. But it's important that you see that each of those things you have to start with having some sort of input on them. When I started in project management really began when I was about 4 years old, and you went to trips. I was cooking and realized I wanted what I want, as much as I want, the way I want it, when I want it. And then I saw that in my family of 7, everybody wants it. And then I later learned that's project management, and that's portfolio management. And I went off to chef school and learned a bit of the rigors of that. I learned a bit more about conflict management, and started learning it from as many perspectives as possible, which now I bring to my portfolio management work. And then skipping ahead to today, I've gone from, say, running projects at 30 hospitals across Ontario simultaneously, where you have to think, what's my portfolio? You have 10 projects pre-flight, 10 in-flight, 10 post-flight, and you end up finding, how you do your portfolio management. And I was looking at what can I do now that I know how to do portfolio management. I want to do it with everything I'm looking at. You're looking at how do you optimize? How do you better know people? How do you better know how these things go right and wrong? And so I did many hospitals, many areas of the whole healthcare sector, all the different ways you could work in it, to try and build out my better understanding of the code whispering in that area. And then I started looking at a meta level. So what do you do when you go above portfolio? And I was looking across the entire province. What are the opportunities that are of critical importance that they're not seeing, even though they should recognize that they themselves are a portfolio of this. So I started looking at that level, and where could say a virtual shared services PMO fit in for medium and small hospitals that can't afford project management, resourcing, or PMOs. And just thinking through at that meta portfolio level, what are the opportunities? What are the things people are missing? And I've been working on that, and then shifted back over to some of the political or security work I've been doing. And now I'm looking at how do we do this with intelligence agencies in as many different countries as possible. How do we enable them to look at what they contribute to the portfolio, and what is it that we can do? So I work with, recruiting universities, students, practitioners, and seeing how we can develop improved portfolio management of our national security issues. What else have I got here? I'm thinking another thing worth noting is I've been giving talks in the last couple of years on the future of intelligence as it's impacted by big data, AI, and quantum. And really what those things do individually and in concert is shorten the intelligence cycle so that there's a lack of an opportunity for oversight, governance, and ethics, which is important control that we have in portfolio management. So we lose that as we speed things up. And that's another critical, factor for de-risking what we're doing in international affairs. And when I look at these things, I'm looking for opportunities again. What are certain countries doing with their intelligence education, for instance? And I think if there is an opportunity, it may be that it isn't in developing a new intelligence capability. It may be reorganizing what we're doing the same way we might do it in healthcare. And it just makes me think of Ted Lasso and Total Football. We need to be having folks who will sacrifice trying to get the score and just trying to help everybody do better at what we're doing. And so I carry some of that good spirit from healthcare over to the security work. That's my 5 minutes.
I love that show. Love the show, Ted Lasso. John, this is a lot of information. It's so good. I think we're going to have another session. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more, Joe.
Okay, let's move right into asking some questions.
Sounds good. Robin, because you ended last, we're going to start with you first. So now we're going to keep an eye on the clock here because we want to be mindful. We want to get a chance for all of our panelists to answer some questions here. So Robin, we are going to start with you. We're going to tackle 2 questions, if that's okay. So the way we're going to do this is 2 questions per panelist. Try to keep an eye on the time. So I'm going to suggest, try to keep your answer to 1 minute or less. So think fast, a little bit on your feet. Again, we're all experts in portfolio management, so this should not be a challenge. All right, Robin, with that, I'm going to start with Robin. So in your slide, you mentioned, it sounds like a test, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not. All right, so in your slides, you mentioned that one of the challenges to achieving higher maturity is the resistance to change. And to double click on that statement, it's overcoming organizational inertia and skepticism. Now, I think all of us have a sense of what inertia could be. But just for our audience, could you give us an example of skepticism? And I know that's a tricky one. And how would you get around it? So again, 1 minute, we'd love to get your thoughts on this.
1 minute on skepticism?
Oh, it's a tough order. I know.
We're gonna get around it.
Yeah. I know how to do that. I've had to do it since I was 4 years old, trying to serve food to people who want it the way. So, and I'll give you this is maybe a good answer, but when I get to a new client, the first thing I ask them is, tell me about how you fail here. So it's really important that they're willing to talk, that I say it in a healthy, confident, clear way, and that we have a conversation about how great failure is. How have we documented it so we can make sure we learn and we don't have a sense of potential surprise. So it's really important to begin by having that conversation. And this is about inertia again. So then I move that conversation over to, how would you like me to interrupt you when I have to come to you? Because it's sort of a project, it isn't operational. So I'm going to have to come to them on time that was already committed to whatever their normal job was. So how do you want to be interrupted? And again, that's taking a negative thing to them, but in a healthy, confident way. And admitting that I understand I'm gonna be interrupted. And then I shift to, if you're not going to be able to hit a timeline or a goal, how do you want me to escalate? Meaning, I'm inviting them to self-police. So I need to know, how do you want me to talk to your manager in a way that doesn't cause you unnecessary headaches? And what would be an incentive to make sure you don't fail? What's one that you would like me to put out there? So I begin by having the healthiest positive discussion about how I'm gonna have to kick butt.
Fantastic. Robin, thank you so much. And this is the whole point of that initial survey when I mentioned that there are different expertise levels. Robin, in your answer, it's not just portfolio, but I can absolutely see this in applying in all walks of project management life, or maybe even just life in general. Thank you so much, Robin. All right, one more question for you, Robin, and if you can try to keep it to a minute, that would be fantastic. Now you mentioned cost savings as part of portfolio management. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind as one of the best ways to measure cost savings? And if so, what would that be?
I look at that kind of as a project specific question. And I'm gonna ask you to repeat it.
Sure. So looking across a portfolio,
Hmm.
if there are ways to measure cost,
Mhm.
what is one of the best ways to do so?
The people I work with. Certainly it has to begin with effective documentation, monitoring, measuring, and control. And if I can build within that framework a way of looking at, expenditures and then prioritizing cross projects, then by making sure it's across projects, it doesn't put us at the mercy of, specific investments in specific projects. And so I've had to do that even across enterprises and organizations and countries. And it's the same thing, is you can't attach the decision making to the individual project. It has to come up and cross over to all of them.
Fantastic, Robin. Thank you. And you know what? And to your point, when it comes to project management, it's that number one thing, which is documentation. I once remember reading this quote on LinkedIn, which said, "The most important thing that you can do to reduce organizational politics is work output," which is one way of saying documentation. If I can't see what you've written, then there's no debate. So Robin, thank you so much for that. Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for that. I will move to Sandra. Sandra, you and I had one. It was on, I recall, managing PMO success. And so I feel that I found it really important, and I'm going to ask you about all this. Thank you. So we're talking about project portfolio success and how you measure it. So if you want to expand on that, that'd be great.
I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit. You have to start with what's your objective and then figuring out how to measure that objective. So if your objective is strategic alignment, then you need to have a way to measure how many of your projects aligned and how well did they align. And so you'll have to create that kind of scoring mechanism and then create that score on all of your projects and go through the portfolio to align. Are they strategically aligned? I gave an earlier one and said, if our goal is to increase our velocity from the idea to the actual start of a project, then I need to measure and I need to put things in place to start that measurement. So we can show from the time somebody submits an idea to the time that the charter is signed, and we start measuring. That would be how we would measure that portfolio. So you need to work with your stakeholders and your steering or your stakeholder group, that really the leadership group that wants your portfolio, and you need to be really clear about what are the goals. And the goals shouldn't be like 200. The goals should really be, a handful of goals. Maybe you've got 3 to 5 goals max, and even 5 is really pushing it. But you start with those goals and you get really hyper focused on what metrics you're using. And you measure before you start, and then you work on that growth, and you keep measuring to see it. So there's hundreds, literally hundreds, and I alluded to some of them at webinar, but I think I gave out a little free booklet as well of different metrics that you can use. It really depends on your goals. So you got to be hyper focused on why are we here and how do we measure our success.
Yeah, and you provide distinction between measuring portfolio versus measuring PMO, and a lot of them were similar KPIs, similar metrics. So I want to move to the second question, which really has to do with what you said in your presentation. You spoke a lot about balance portfolio. How do you determine the right balance in portfolio?
So again, it's going to be organizational specific and depending on what their challenges are that they're working with and their objectives. So if I'm in a for-profit organization that needs to hit certain revenue targets, maximizing value is going to be one of the things I look at. Then I might look at, usually I'll choose 3 things. You can slice and dice it, but when you do a bubble chart, you have like your x-axis, your y-axis, and then the size of that bubble. So I might look at maximizing value by complexity and risk. I might choose those, or resource allocation and risk. So I'll choose those 3 elements and I'll look at our prioritization, and then I'll model out what I think makes sense and take it back with the different models to show a good mix of some low complexity versus some higher complexity that have higher value. Because, you know, your executives will say, I want the most money, all these projects, we take the top 10, make $10 million, we're good, we want that. And then you deliver nothing at the end of the year and the portfolio is a failure. And you have to show them, you've got to balance that with risk. What are the chances of us hitting this if our risk profile is a medium to high on every single project? So let's mitigate that risk. It's kind of like your financial proposal, your portfolio. If I go to the bank and say, hey, give me a great, I want great stock options here, and I want the most riskiest investments I can do. And I put $100,000 on all the risky investments, and I'm so disappointed at the end of the year when my hands are empty or it's eroded. A lot of times when you build that, if you build your RRSP, the bank will do an assessment on what's your risk profile? What is it that you can handle? If you're younger, they're like, let's take some chances because you've got time to recover. But your executive might not have that risk profile. They might have a very different risk profile. So you need to know what their risk profile is, and then you look at, this is a good balance and this is what matters to us, right? So you choose those elements that matter to them and you model out what you think makes sense for them against their plans for each year.
Thank you, John. My risk profile with the bank was very high, so I did not succeed. So moving on to you.
Luckily, your finances are on the topic for this meeting, so we shall move on. Ronald, I know you had a question about prioritization of projects, so I hope the answer that Sandra has given us likely touched on prioritization. So everyone, we've got fantastic questions coming in so far. Next question, we are going to direct it to Shannon. And in this case, I'm actually going to take one of the audience's questions. By the way, this session is recorded, everyone, so please go ahead and post the questions. In the interest of time, we may not get to all of these questions right now, but rest assured, we're going to send it back to our panelists after this event, and we will have these questions answered. But in the meantime, we're going to do what we can so far. Now, this is a question from Vendra, and the question is, what are the low-hanging fruit fundamental activities to start implementing an organization when you eventually want to implement portfolio management down the line?
Oh, good question. I feel like this would be a good one for you. So the low hanging fruit for me, and I think this depends on depends on the organization and what the organizational goals are, their maturity level, their risk appetite. One of the organizations in the past where I implemented PPM, I started with a business case, just a business case. Like if we can get that much done, if we can get the leader to articulate what it is they're trying to achieve with this project, what the high level estimate is, and it's shocking how many people are so afraid to put down an estimate. Probably because they were held accountable to that estimate in the past, and there wasn't any appetite for failure or to learn and adjust. And so the culture comes back to that. And so I would say, starting with a business case, starting with documentation, you mentioned it earlier, if you can get some artifacts where people are not just talking about ideas, but they're putting those ideas on paper. And then that way, from a portfolio perspective, you can take all of that information that is, you're collecting standard types of information across project names. You want to standardize on those, start and end dates, your budgets, your goals, what you're aligning to strategy, what the risks are. And so just getting things documented. So I would start there. That would be low hanging fruit, would be what you call it, a project charter, project on a page, whatever, documenting. And then the second I would say is getting agreement. You don't necessarily need a sophisticated tool or a sophisticated process for prioritizing, but having a way to bring information in, bring ideas in taking those ideas, funneling them in, and then having a way of sorting that information and spitting out the end a ranked list so that you can behind the scenes assess the balance, whether or not that portfolio is balanced or not. And then the third piece of low-hanging fruit would be the reporting, monitoring and reporting, because if you're not reporting back against or monitoring what you said you were going to do, then you don't know whether you've achieved that or not. So those would be that's my answer.
Great, thank you very much, Shannon. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to do one more question for you, Shannon. So if we can try to keep this to a minute. So let's get into this question. So now, sorry, for the audience, I see a lot of questions coming about the PMO, and I just want to say that that's a slightly different topic. We're going to focus on portfolio management today. So again, like I said, this event is recorded. We are taking all of these questions and we will answer them offline. From a portfolio management perspective, is there a single metric or maybe one or two top metrics that you could think of? And this question is coming from Lazette. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. That you would recommend to track the success of portfolio management.
I'm going to go back to Sandra's comments earlier, and I think if you can demonstrate that your overall objectives, your goals were achieved, and so the way I like to do that is through benefits realization. So having each project define a metric for achieving whether or not success was achieved, and so then measuring back against those. But I don't know if I answered the question. So that would be my top one, would be saying, okay, look at what was the goal you're trying to achieve, the strategic goal. And then how do you measure that? What is the metric you use to say you've achieved that strategic goal? And then reporting it on that.
I actually think you've answered the question perfectly, because it's really hard to come up with a single metric, but rather it's what is the overall holistic measure that you're looking at. So I think starting from goals is fantastic. And then based on one of the keywords that we've heard so far is depends on the organization. So it's going to change from organization to organization. So Shannon, thank you very much. Joe, I'll turn it over to you for any questions for Giuliano.
Giuliano, we have Carla Brown asking a question about value, PMO's value, and how you explain that. And I know that in your slides, we spoke about what is broken in an organization that warrants a PPM as a solution. So that speaks to value as well. Take it away.
Yeah, great question. And the way you look at it, organizations as a whole, they really have two common elements that are really important. On one side, you got the strategy, what the organization is trying to achieve, their very reason for being, and two, executing on that strategy. So where PPM becomes very valuable is being that bridge connecting the two, connecting strategy to execution. And if you're resourced properly and you have the right skill set, that becomes easy. You are the subject matter expert of execution, but you also understand.
Great, thanks. This one is a question that everyone has on their mind, and it has to do with AI. How do you think artificial intelligence can help PPM today?
Another great question. So I think everyone has a specific idea of what AI is. And I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards automation a lot of times. I tend to use AI almost as a business partner. So basically taking the ideas I have, the idea my team has, the organization has, and really expanding upon that in terms of adjacent risks, adjacent strategies, parallel strategies. That's kind of my interpretation of AI from a PPM perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely a very sexy topic. And you have noted a bit about that in your LinkedIn profile, I noticed. AI for project managers. And so, and also for portfolio and PMO leaders too.
100%. Yeah, it's really, we're in an opportunity for all of us to really change the way we operate as project managers, as PMO leaders, etc. And as change leaders, it's an exciting time for us. So,
can you use it for prioritization? I think
you can.
Shannon was mentioning that too.
100%. Yeah, it's all about the amount of data you have and the context you have. The more data you have, and the more concrete and reputable data you have, the more the output is going to be successful.
Wow, great responses, and look at that, we're good with time. So, do you have any other questions we think we should ask?
Yeah,
Well,
so we have a few questions from the audience. Let's take a quick look. Okay, so this one, maybe we can do a round robin, and I think just because I use that phrase, maybe Robin, we can start with you. Robin, what is the best software you have used to manage portfolios, or do you have any recommendations for our audience?
Always just pen and paper. I don't know if you folks have any ideas, but no, there's nothing beats pen and paper for me. I also have about 7 whiteboards.
Oh, amazing.
Travel size whiteboards. Constant. I'm neurodiverse, so I need to be drawing to understand. But I have said to people from a very young age, if you don't know it well enough to draw me a picture about it, you don't know it well enough to be talking to me about it. And I can invoke that and assert that, and it's really effective. So yeah, I that's just me.
Well, this is Chanel's response online. Yes, pen and paper.
How about this audience?
As well.
While you get the mic, I actually, while I like pen and paper, I will use software because it's a lot to manage other ones. So I've used tools like PlanView, which is great to have everybody manage their projects that way, but then also manage the information from a portfolio perspective. And it gives us that one source that we can go to. I've used some other tools like Smartsheet, which you have to do a little bit more expertise at Smartsheet to build it out the way you want. But that tool is interesting as well. A new one I haven't played with, but I find extremely interesting is called Work Otter, developed by project managers. So really, when I looked at it, it felt intuitive because it's what we do. And it was exciting, and they've started to build in some AI advancements as well. So I can't wait to find a client that uses it so that I can work with it on them, because it looks pretty neat. But there's a lot of great tools. I think the point is finding what works for your organization and not starting with a tool. Don't start with a tool because you're going to try to shoehorn them into an approach that may not suit them. Start first with the processes. How do we do this? What's the base? So pen and papers are potentially, or maybe a little bit more updated, like the Excel or something like that. But it's okay, Rob. It's okay. It's okay.
So we're going to move to the in-person attendees. Have a question. There's 2 questions. So start with introducing yourself quickly and take no longer than 2 seconds.
Hello, I'm John Barreto. Question open for any of the panelists. First of all, thank you for the information. When I have worked on implementation of portfolio management, one of the challenges that I found the most critical is the capacity management of the resources and the balancing of the resources. In your experience, what is the best advice that you can give people when you are going through that process and understanding how you will manage the resources that will deliver the portfolio? Let's go.
There we go. Perfect. So yeah, I think to be honest, it really comes down to prioritization, really understanding what the key objectives of the company are. At the end of the day, and I think it was mentioned in the past, is there's only so many projects you can take on, there's only so many resources available. Resources are limited by nature. So being able to effectively prioritize by either a scoring mechanism, collaboration with key stakeholders is the most important thing. Once you have alignment there and have alignment on how you weigh initiatives that come through, makes the decision easier for all. Some people may not like the response if their projects keep getting pushed down the wayside. But at the end of the day, it's really the alignment of the organization, working with what you have.
I would add, working on your work estimates. So what are your estimates? Did you have inaccurate durations and work effort allocated? And did your project slip and there wasn't enough capacity? And in projects, if you take a bit more of a critical chain, if you're familiar with critical chain as opposed to critical path, critical chain builds in a little bit of that buffer for that whole chain, so that if things do slip, you have capacity to handle it and start to introduce those types of things in your organization. It helps you so that you can manage it better, and then go back and don't be afraid to reevaluate your timelines. If you have a history of underestimating, which lots of organizations do, then go back and add the applicable. It's 25%. I'm adding 25% to my resourcing so that I don't over allocate. Start to look at those types of things across your portfolio. And like I said, you might have to look at, if you've got the money and the funding, but you don't have the resourcing, let's start looking at other resourcing opportunities, or what can I put to an external hire that could help a contract.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm in fintech portfolio and product management for the last 10 years, serving all the banks and financial institutes in Canada, in the US, and the world. And I want to thank PMO community for arranging these fruitful sessions and panelists, giving the insights you were given, and thank you for that. So my question is, what are your top recommendations about integrating the PPM and portfolio into the organizational context in terms of the way it's structured, the way it is globally or locally dispersed, and like the type of clientele and industry and basically the domain and the whole context of the domain that they're operating? What are your top recommendations?
Question. Okay. I think this is a really important question, because where the PPM sits in the organization, I don't mean org chart, but I mean like in the culture and how the organization works is really important. And so it needs to sit. There was a question at some point about whether you need a chief product officer or chief project officer, and I don't think you need a chief project officer, but I definitely agree that you need a leader who believes in the value and the power of PPM and who can advocate for the processes, for the rigor, for the governance that comes along with PPM. You need that individual high enough up in the organization that has the ear of the decision makers and has the influence to be able to not just implement PPM, but then to maintain and drive that compliance on a go-forward basis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. John, I think we are at the end of our show. Do we have any other burning questions? Maybe the panelists have some before we finish off? And I know Aina is waiting to close off for us today. So it's 7:23. And any other questions from the crowd or online? There's a new message here. What have we got? Oh, somebody mentioned Monday.com.
Maybe, Joe, what I would recommend is, very quickly, what's the top closing thought you'd like to leave our audience with? So maybe we can go in the order that I see you all. So Giuliano, if there's one thing you'd like our audience to take away from this event from what you talked about, what's that?
Yeah, for sure. So long story short, PPM in general should be considered a value add to an organization. Don't start before you're ready to start. Make sure you have the proper maturity of a project methodology in place first, and really take some time to understand the business. That's how you're going to get the most value for PPM.
Thank you, Giuliano.
The message I would leave is to listen well, so we can get into that organization, listening to what the business is about, who the key players are, what's important to the organization, and then being agile. I don't mean agile like agile project management, and be flexible. Be flexible and try not to come in and stay by the book or to implement some theory. Be very flexible and look at what works for the organization and then grow from there.
Be nimble and be able to pivot.
I think I have two. I'm gonna go fast. So one, be clear on what you're measuring, right? Be clear on what that objective is and then measure it. And then two, balance that portfolio. Make sure that your organization is going to be successful. How you balance it.
And I would add to that, if you can get all of those things right, that you just mentioned, you're going to need to begin by having empathize with every stakeholder in that organization to ensure that you have everybody's buy-in up and down that chain like a racy chart. If you don't have everybody's estimation of what success is and their perceptions, there's no amount of science you can get right to this that will get you there. So there's an art and a science, and you're the artist.
Well, John, I think I learned a lot, and these players or artists are amazing. Thank you so much. We want to thank them for, taking their time. We often don't thank them enough. We take them for granted sometimes, but really, it's a lot of work to prepare and come out and volunteer your time. So kudos to you. Let's give them a hand, folks.
Absolutely. What I need to see from as an observation is it's funny, like the more higher you get in your profession, the more you realize it's more about the art form. When you're at the lower rungs of the ladder, you can see, hey, I need to get the technicalities, the science of it. But what we're seeing today from a very experienced panelist here is just how big of a factor the art factor is. Joe, is there anything else before we turn it over to our
I'm just waiting for part 2. Next month, perhaps.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I hope you'll come back sometime. And thank you so much. Thank you to the attendees online. And I want to bring Aina right now, because she has a few burning points to make.
Thank you very much, guys. So first of all, thank you all the panelists for staying here with us today and celebrating our birthday and sharing the knowledge. Very much appreciated. Also, very much appreciate the PMO community leadership team, Luca, John, Joe, Dimitri, who is not here with us, but has been with us during the whole process. And definitely our volunteers. So, Luca, do we have a surprise?
A surprise.
Yes. We definitely have a surprise, and while Luca is preparing that, so we really raised our volunteering team. We started with just 2 or 3 marketing people. Thank you, Luca. Well, unfortunately, our marketing team is not here today. They couldn't come, but Pavi was our first marketing and design volunteers. She joined our team, the first one. We just addressed it online. I want to acknowledge that when people have so much enthusiasm and jump in on the ship, which just started going and without having a clear direction when it's going, but having enthusiasm to support. So this was a lot. The same Aditi and Karuna. Very much appreciate you ladies. But today we have our project management team, so I want to personally thank each of you. Hey, please come here. Don't shy. People online site.
Thank you.
Nishita, you are the next, please. Another project manager. Gaurav, your turn. Three more. That's great. And your team. So one more time, I would like to acknowledge our volunteers, the team, because we wouldn't be able to make this event today without these people. And again, they joined us during our first year, providing the enthusiasm. And you know, when we hire professionals, if people don't have some technical skills or like don't have 100% skills of the job profile, we might train them. But enthusiasm, human skills, art of the profession, it's very hard to train. And so in the PMO community, we really recognize those who are volunteering their time and doing everything almost perfectly. So I just want to acknowledge these people one more time. And when we're done with the event, to take a picture of them. And for those who are hiring new enthusiastic people, these are the names. Don't look further. And with that, I would like to invite everyone to celebrate our first year of the PMO community, and please network, mingle, communicate, exchange the contacts. Party time. Joe, part two, we made it here.
Well, we also want to thank our online attendees again, and we're going to be closing off the online Zoom. Hopefully they've had a chance to do a quick poll. I don't know if that happened. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. John, anything? Oh, yeah, sorry, online, just if you can, we're gonna bring some polls, Zoom polls in, and please take two minutes at the most.